Next, you'll hear my interview with Speaker of the House Jason White. You'll note that we spoke before the Senate bill with all its details was introduced. Each week, we have an in-depth conversation with one of the key players in the legislative process. This week, we're glad to welcome Speaker of the House Jason White to our MPB studios. Speaker White is a Republican from the town of West in Holmes County. He has served in the legislature since 2012 and succeeded Philip Gunn as Speaker in 2024. Jason White, welcome to At Issue. We're glad to have you with us.
Thank you, Wilson. It's good to be here.
Let's talk first about House Bill 1, the tax cut and elimination of the income tax. It passed at the very beginning of the session. The Senate just last week passed their alternative proposal with a much smaller tax cut. How can the two chambers find some middle ground and pass something?
Well, that's the trick of the trade, is finding that middle ground on any issue these days, but especially on one as big as this issue of tax and how we build a state budget, how we gather the revenue, if you will, how we tax our people, and then ultimately how we spend it. And so it's appropriate that you and I start off talking about it, because it is the first thing in the House of Representatives that we talked about this year. And we said, appropriately named, we wanted our first bill to be our tax reform package that now is affectionately known as House Bill 1, or we call it the Build Up Mississippi Act, because it's got a lot of different features to it. Whereas the Senate plan, I would tell you, the Senate, number one, they have not passed a plan yet. They have not even dropped that actual bill yet. So there is no legislation for me to compare and contrast with, because they don't have a bill yet. Now, they did announce a plan last week, and I anticipate that hopefully in the near future they will actually drop a bill. As we say, drop, in other words, publish their bill that the lieutenant governor would then refer to a committee. But we still hadn't seen their actual bill yet. Nobody has. I guess it doesn't exist yet, but it's coming, we hear. I guess it will be based on the tenets that they announced last week, which is cutting the income tax from 4 to 3 over 3 years, cutting the grocery tax immediately from 7 to 5, and then raising the gas excise tax 3 cents a year for 3 years, and then indexing it thereafter. And those are certainly, I would applaud all three of those movements, if you will, or key pieces, those are the only pieces of their legislation, but those are key pieces of ours as well. So while, it doesn't go as far as I want to go, it's not as aggressive as I want it to be, and it doesn't ultimately lead to the elimination of the personal income tax, it is a step in the right direction. And so a lot of people were really, thinking, oh, well, the Senate didn't do this or do that. I'm encouraged in the seat I get to sit in. Part of my job, as you asked me in the question, what are y'all going to do? How can those two ideas come together, and will we see legislation result from it? My job is to figure out the best path forward that gets us to the best possible place for all Mississippians, whatever that is. Politics, certainly those play into everything we do up there, but good policy makes good politics. And so I would just say, when they do publish their plan and get it out there, and then of course they've got to pass it. We've passed our bill back in January, which might seem fast to some of your listeners. The Senate even tried to criticize us for acting so fast, but I would remind your listeners and the state Senate, the House formed a select committee on tax reform last year right after the session in May. And that committee met all summer and fall. It was made up of some of my smartest people in the House who had indicated a willingness and want to get involved in tax reform, House members from all over the state. And their only goal was to figure out, is there a path forward for tax reform in our state, and what does that look like? And everybody says, why do y'all keep talking about tax cuts, tax reform? Here's why. We continue to take in almost $8 billion a year in revenues, and we're only spending about $7 billion. So this year we'll take in about $7.8 billion. Our budget is $7.058 billion. So we are on the front end taking in almost $750 million that we're not spending. And because of that 10% excess we keep taking in, you're going to continue to hear Republicans talk about ways to give money back to Mississippians. The difference is, what does that look like, and at what speed would we do that? I would say, as far as the difference in the House and the Senate, and that's, they couch themselves as the more deliberative body, and sometimes I get frustrated with their slowness in the way, their deliberate nature, if you will. But I don't take anything away from them for that. That probably makes the system overall work better, and things are vetted out between House and Senate better. So I don't beat them up too much for that. I would say, yes, we came out with ours quick in January, but that was the result of 7 or 8 months of work, not 3 weeks in January. Hey, let's come up with a House plan. Folks were real concerned that we weren't really seeing the Senate's work product until they revealed that last week. So that's, you won't hear me beat them up about that. I do think it points to the nature of, we spent a lot of time studying all these different facets of it. And as you know, if you looked at House Bill 1 at all, our plan, it reduces the income tax from 4 to 3 in the first year. So in 1 year, we go from 4 to 3. They want to do that over 3 years. And then after that, we peel down that other 3% over 10 years. So it is a measured, very conservative cut, 0.3% over 10 years to take down that final 3% to get us to zero and join some of our other southern sister states who have had so much success with their economies. Will this fix everything in our economy that makes everybody want to relocate to Mississippi? No, but it'll be one more piece if we can get there with total elimination we've done some things in recent years to put ourselves kind of to the forefront. I would even take you back to the changing of our state flag to change our image nationally, regardless of how Mississippians felt about it. And we were divided on that issue. There was no denying that the nation and folks outside of Mississippi, they don't know what you and I know about how great our people are and how hardworking they are and how loyal they are and all the great things, the sense of community that so many of our Mississippians have, and it's kind of prevailing thought, if you will, among Mississippians. People don't know that. They just see what we put out there. This is one more thing we can put out there to say, hey, this is how open for business we are. We don't want any of your personal income tax. We want you to keep what you earn, spend it as you will, and we will be a consumption-based economy on sales tax, gas tax, and things like that.
You'd be hard-pressed to find someone who would be against paying less in taxes, but can you be certain that the state can afford this in the coming years, that we'll continue to be flush with revenue to make up for these cuts?
I don't know about flush with revenue, but I don't know that we're supposed to be flush with revenue. We're supposed to continue to cover what we call core functions of government, things that citizens, Republican, Democrat, black, white, Delta, Hills, Gulf Coast, Pine Belt, there are certain things that all people center on and expect from government, things like public safety, some aspect of healthcare, our corrections budget and the folks and the way we imprison and reform and rehab our folks that have been convicted of a crime and become custody of the state. We continue to see that number go up. We spend hundreds of millions of dollars there. And not only those things, but the way we fund infrastructure and bringing our highway system into the 21st century, that's going to take money to do it. So there's certainly things that we've got to realize. We've looked at our mental health situation through the Department of Health and our child protective services. Those are things we have not done so great with. We're trying to do better there and fund those at a level that allow for some reform that kind of get us back up on par, so to speak. And we hadn't even talked about funding education, which, Republicans sometimes get a bad rap for education. I would remind everybody, last year was the largest investment in K-12 education in our state's history at over $3 billion with the new funding formula. So we've put our money, I would say, where our mouth is when it comes to our priorities, and those being public education, public safety, corrections, and Medicaid. Those take about 3/4 of our state budget. So if we spend $7 billion, about 3/4 of that is spent on just those things I just mentioned. Those are core functions of government. Nobody's here with a slash and burn attitude. Now, there's no denying some of these surpluses had to do with the pandemic and the federal spending that happened in the years after, even through this year. That has subsided a little bit. I would just say in no year has our state economy not grown 2 or 3%. And 2 or 3% is enough to cover a 0.3% cut of the income tax going forward. Especially with the House plan, we slightly raise the sales tax. That helps offset that a little bit. And even with a 1.5-cent increase in sales tax, our general sales tax rate would be 8.5 cents. That's a full penny and sometimes 2 pennies, depending on which of our sister states or southern states you want to compare us to. But specifically, we look a lot at Louisiana, Arkansas, Tennessee, and Alabama. we would be at least a full penny less than any of those states, even with the increase. And we would join Tennessee as a no income tax state. We just think for us, that's a no-brainer. And our projections show that it is sustainable. Now, it takes 10 years to get there, and that's a long time. And my Senate counterparts say, well, there's nothing saying we can't come back in 2 or 3 years and do a little more and do a little more. But I know how finicky politicians are, because I'm one of them, and I see them act. And when the door's shut and people like Wilson Stribling aren't watching them, I know how they act. And we don't spend our money. We don't spend state dollars the exact way we spend our own money. And I want us to spend it more like we spend our personal money. And to do that, we would take less. We would really drill down on budgets and only spend where necessary. And I think tax cuts force that conversation too about what do Mississippians expect of their government? What should we be involved in and what not? It is more than doable. Nobody has argued it's not doable. The detractors say, no reason to go all in. We can do it again in a year or two, or do it. Well, leaders change, folks in positions change. While we've got this unique opportunity, the stars kind of lining up for this to happen. While also a piece that is key to the House plan, and the Senate does, as I said, they do raise gas excise tax 9 cents. Ours does it a little different. We raise a sales tax on gas to 5 cents, a 5-cent sales tax, which generates quite a bit more money than the Senate plan does. But our MDOT and the way we fund infrastructure is in dire need, and you won't hardly find anybody on either side of the political aisle that doesn't agree we need to fund roads and bridges. And we had a great program in 1987. I'm not down on those guys and girls that passed that program in the legislature, but we didn't allow for future funding of it. And so we're on a funding model from 87 that was a flat 18.4 cents a gallon, and it won't pave highways and fix bridges in 2025.
House Bill 1433, that's the school choice bill. It's been tabled after a lack of Republican caucus consensus. What are the major stumbling blocks with that issue? And is it really dead, or could it come back before we're over?
I would say it's probably, now I learned last year nothing's really dead, even when it's triple dead, because we were attempting to rewrite the school funding formula and do away with MAP and go with our Inspire model. And the Senate killed it 3 times. And usually that third time, around there, it's dead. When they clip it the third time, you move on to something else. But we were able to suspend the rules and get it up again to the point to get that bill up and going again, to the point of it taught me a valuable lesson, in that not only persistence, but the fact that 2 beats 1 around the Capitol. In other words, you've got the House position on things, you've usually got a Senate position on something, and you got the governor sitting over in the mansion or at Sillars with his position or her position on something. And it taught me a valuable lesson around there about 2 beating 1. And the governor decided to get on board with the House plan to rewrite the education funding formula. When he did that, and this tells you about, number one, the 2 versus 1, also with regards to the power of social media, he made a Facebook post and did a couple of tweets, and all of a sudden the Senate was ready to talk about that funding formula. We suspend the rules, do a bill, and we're off and running. So back to your question about school choice. It's probably dead for this year because the consensus is not there. The conversation gets so heated so fast because there's no denying that, especially when you bring the private school aspect into the conversation. Nobody's denying why private schools originally and initially sprang up in our state. It was to avoid integration. Nobody's hiding that fact. But it's 50 years down the road, and there are places in our state where kids are stuck in failing public school districts, and their parents don't have the means to pick up and move somewhere to another zip code that has a better school district to afford them a quality education. I will tell you, we have excellent public schools in our state. Excellent. No, this isn't about harpooning them or doing anything to cast light. This is about, for the kids that don't have that, offering them something, offering parents. And I have a lot of people say, well, their parents, they're not gonna see that choice through. That's the reason the kids are stuck where they are to begin with. That may be true. But for parents and kids who do want something different, who are we to say, tough, you just got to stick it out? It's just luck of the draw. You were born in this school district. That's where you got to go. If I told you that about groceries or college education, or doctor or anything else, folks would be up in arms. But for some reason, we have this notion with choice, especially if it involves the option to go to a private school, as just being off the table. Cannot happen. And I would remind you, the House bill, there was no Senate bill. I read a few articles this weekend about House lets choice bill die, and it seemed to be a little bit critical of my House colleagues for letting it die. And I'm like, well, it was the only game in town, number one. There was not a Senate bill, number one. So I got to applaud my House colleagues for being willing to take on the debate, because it does not come without super hot politics, because you get superintendents of public schools who have worked their entire life to make their public schools great. I get it. There's something very valuable in the role that they play in our public schools. But folks get very nervous when you start moving the pieces around on the board, and I get it. I understand it. I tried to prove to them last year with our funding formula that funded public schools at a historically high level put our money where our mouth was and say, we are for public schools. We just realize in some places we can't seem to get off the bottom, whatever the reason, whether it's poverty, whether it's, single parent homes, whether it's leadership in those school districts, whatever it is, we can't seem to move them forward. But it can't just be about money anymore as we fund them robustly. I was proud of the conversation that was centered around it. Let me remind you of what the House bill did do. It allowed a public school student only. In other words, this was not for currently kids in private school. You already had to be enrolled in public school at least for a year and attended that public school for a year, and it be D or F. Only D and F schools we're talking about. So you're an existing public school student at a D and F district. Kids up to 138% of the federal poverty level were given preference. In other words, those kids first, because we were only funding the local piece with $5 million of state money. And, if a lot of people availed themselves to choice, that money would run out quick. Now, I'll get to that in a minute. But so we were giving preference to kids up to 138% of poverty. So we're talking about kids in poverty at D and F school districts that have attended public school, not private school kids. This wasn't about funneling money to private schools. It wasn't about paying for folks already there and that sort of thing. It was about helping kids trapped in public school districts whose parents don't have an option. Now, what the bill said was the state portion of funding per student, which is about $6,600, would follow that kid to any other private school. And by the way, they couldn't even try a private school unless no other public school within 30 miles would accept them.
So they had first try a public school if
within
it was
30
available.
miles. Yep.
Right.
And they had to fund their own transportation there. But if not, the state share of per pupil funding, which is about $6,600, would follow that kid to potentially a charter, a private school, wherever they could find that they could get in that suited their needs. And then they could avail themselves, in addition to the state portion following them. Folks said, this would cause locals to have to pay that portion. It did not do that. The local tax money of the school district where the student lives didn't follow that kid. It stayed there in the local school district. The state was going to pick up the local share. Now, we didn't fund that unlimited. We just put $5 million in the account, and we would see how many kids availed themselves to it. That's when we gave the preference to the poverty kids. And we would find out, do parents use it? Do kids use it? We thought it was a really good test run, if you will, a pilot project without calling it that, to see what kids actually and parents would actually do in these failing districts, trying to break that cycle of the chronic DNF districts, because lawmakers around the cap can tell you which schools those are. Now, there's no denying we've made huge gains in our public school ratings over the last few years, over the last 10 years specifically. I mean, huge, worth celebrating. This is not about that. This is about the ones that remain in those DNF districts.
You mentioned how the governor could affect the process, the legislative process. Just last week, we saw the governor locking horns with a Republican state senator and airing his disagreements on social media. And then we saw the state auditor in a spat with another Republican state senator. What's the climate right now on the House side, and how do you manage members, sometimes within the same party, in times like these?
I would tell you I probably spend more time on that than most anything else.
Really?
Because, to whom much is given, much is expected. And think about these numbers for a minute. In the House, there are 122 members, 79 are Republicans. So 2/3 of the seats are held by Republicans, and very similar numbers in the Senate. All of our statewide elected are Republicans. So, at some point, folks start turning those barrels internally. Now, I would tell you, maybe not the governor's recent disagreements with some in the state Senate on an early voting bill, but all the ones before that, they're guys and girls that I like very much and enjoy good relationships with them. I think that has more to do with the politics of an upcoming gubernatorial race and folks looking around and saying, that's my competition or that's my competition, and I need to poke a hole there if I can. I don't know. That's never been my style personally, and so I've kind of stayed out of that and tried to go along the lines of, and Philip Gunn was a good mentor for me about good policy makes good politics, and he never let personal politics get in the way of doing what was right. If he would, we still wouldn't have a change of our state flag, because no matter what anybody tells you, if that man hadn't have stood up and risked his entire political career for it, we wouldn't have it. And so people of this state owe him a huge debt of gratitude on that issue. Now, certainly people came alongside after the fact, but I say all that to say we're going to focus on policy and try not to get, everybody that's been in those feuds this week and last week have been involved in statewide races, except for Senator England, I think, or they are either contemplating a statewide race, some of those state senators that have been involved in that. And so that's never been our style to be there. I think it's very unfortunate. We were the subject of some of that last year in the Medicaid debate. The governor was not crazy about our plan to cover low-income workers. And I kid him about it sometimes when I meet with him. I'm like, Governor, you want to talk about Medicaid today? And he's like, no, you're still wrong on it. And I tell him he's wrong on it, and we move on. I don't hate him about it. It's not personal for me. He's got his convictions, and guess what? He got elected governor by the people of this state. I have to respect his position on things. Now, it doesn't mean that you give up yours. And so I don't know where we'll get with early voting. We polled a lot of things last year. My House Leadership Fund, we polled a lot of issues with Mississippians to see where they are. We polled that issue. It did not poll well with Republican primary voters. Now, is it an idea that's come forward? I heard some senators saying last week, well, 47 states do this. Well, guess what? 47 states do a whole lot of things that we don't do. We've passed direct ship for wine and liquor in the House several years in a row. The Senate just finally did it this year. We're one of only 2 states that doesn't allow that. We have 40 states that have Medicaid expansion and cover low-income workers. We still don't do it. So on this issue of early voting, they seem to be using a little bit of select memory on what other states do and what we should do. Having said that, we'll vet that issue on the House end and see where we get. I think how senators feel or the governor feels on the issue, certainly they play a part, but they won't control what the House does on it. We'll make our own decisions based on that. And I hope my House colleagues will keep it about the policy and not about the personalities. Those are all good people, and I respect them, and it's not my style for sure.
What other legislation are you most proud of so far this session?
This session, those education bills. We hadn't talked about them much, and they didn't get a lot of publicity, but we currently have an education scholarship accounts where for special needs kids, for military kids, for foster kids, things like that, we have people who have an IEP, an independent, where they're saying they need something different than the normal public school setting where they are. We allow those kids to have a savings account, if you will, to take the state money and go to some other option. We have a waiting list there. More people apply for it every year than we fund. Our ESA bill cleans up that waiting list and kind of streamlines the process. We now make folks that avail themselves of that program, they have to front the money and then get reimbursed. Most states don't do that. We have the money. We can set up the account. If you're going to an accredited school, we can send the money to you and get it there quickly without you having to front the money. There are things we could do. It's like we're doing everything we can to not help those folks when we ought to be doing the opposite. So it's a really good cleanup bill. I'm proud of the portability. We call it portability. We're allowing public to public school transfers for kids your homeschool district shouldn't be able to hold you back. And this is, some people call this choice light or choice this or that, but it would allow public school students to transfer to any other public school that would accept them, and their local homeschool district couldn't hold them against their will. Currently, under state law, you have to get your the board of your homeschool district to release you to avail yourselves to go to another public school.
Both sides have to
Both
say yes
sides.
to it.
And this just says the receiving school has to agree to it. Lots of tricky politics with that because folks, again, this is dipping your toe in the water of choice. And it was a very long and hot debate on the House floor, but I was proud of that legislation, and I certainly hope that my Senate colleagues will take it seriously. The Lieutenant Governor stated last year publicly on more than one occasion that he was for portability from public to public. So now he's got his shot. We've sent him a bill, and we'll be anxious to see them hopefully move that along.
We still have some weeks to go. We'll be keeping up with everything that's going on with you in the House and, of course, the Senate at the state capitol. Speaker of the House, Jason White, we thank you for your time on At Issue today.
Thank you, Wilson. Good to be with you.